But my concern is that the crypto AI thing is going to be the biggest sort of money grab thing of this cycle, because it's just completely not real.
Sure.
And this is not vaporware. Vapor is far too substantial to describe what they have in
Oh,
actual fact. There
oh,
are real things that will probably be built in the crypto industry that intersect with or are applicable to the AI industry. A crude way of thinking about it is that if you're marketing primarily as like the platform for artificial intelligence in crypto, probably full of shit. And we're back. Uh, Wildly unprepared as usual.
well, I wouldn't say wildly. It's within expected parameters of unpreparedness.
I considered having a conversation about what we should talk about prior to pressing record, but then just decided, fuck it.
Well, if we are going to end up the entire hour ranting about Costa Rica, then we are very much prepared.
Yeah. Uh, Interestingly, this is very unrelated to everything, but just came to my mind. There's apparently a thing going around on YouTube where if you say two specific words related to rock climbing without a rope, there's a name for it. There's a movie. Um, you get demonetized. So obviously we could say it because
Move it.
what?
What's the
No, it's
word?
free solo.
Oh, okay.
So like I follow some rock climbers, and this is apparently a real thing. Like every rock climbing YouTube channel has suddenly stopped saying the words free solo. And they have to come up with some other thing because YouTube is just going around demonetizing everything where it's mentioned.
Wait, why? I'm curious. Is it because it's dangerous? Is it like an alias for some drug now, or?
I don't know. The one reason why it's especially confusing is because it's a very well-known movie.
Yep.
So like how do you refer to like 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 you
Now,
can't just
are
take
they
out
just
things from the real world.
demonetizing rock climbing channels that use the word, or are they demonetizing anyone who uses the word? I mean, not that we would notice we're not monetizing this. So.
I don't know because I've only like it's only come up in rock climbing channels where obviously as a term it comes up more in general, I would assume.
Hmm. Okay, now you got
But
me
a pretty
curious, and
interesting
if this
phenomenon.
is you got me curious now, and this is related to some other cultural thing going on, like it's an alias for something. I'm gonna have to look it up after, but let's not get too sidetracked.
Yeah, I don't think so. But the reason I bring this up is not so much because of this specific example, but I think like it's kind of wacky. Like there's a very strange feeling that I get when I watch videos like totally different people over, a period of a couple weeks, and suddenly all of them start saying, "We can't say this word. We can't say this word," and it's like, what? It's got a very like Orwellian feel to it,
Interesting.
and it's quite possible that like you know YouTube is just noticed or something, or like the algorithm or whatever thing, whatever their process is, has decided that if a video mentions free soloing, there's a high likelihood that the video contains someone dying. Like this, that's a reasonable possibility. Um, I think that's fairly unlikely, like mostly. If a video is titled around that, or if they're talking about that, it's mostly about Alex Honnold or like a couple of other people who are known to do some freestyling. But
Okay.
anyway, this was actually very relevant to our podcast name,
And
just not the content.
I actually thought when I first of all I had no idea that you looked at rock climbing channels. I thought that you had kind of like just stumbled upon the spelunking related things after we came up with the name.
Oh no, I follow all kinds of weird channels. I have all these like extremely niche like very niche internet things that I know weirdly much about. As an
I wouldn't say
example, at some point I got really into arm wrestling competitions on YouTube, and I watched a whole bunch of the like mainly like around mainly like the culture of arm wrestling, less about the actual arm wrestling because it's super weird. Like nobody makes any money, but then they have like superstars, and it's I don't know, it's just strange.
okay. I'm I was going to say that free solo is not that niche, given that there's a major documentary, and even like I know the term, and I'm not in this space at all. But arm wrestling superstars is, I would say, is definitely niche. So congratulations.
Yeah. Anyway, um, there's quite a lot of crazy stuff that has happened since last time. I think that we could maybe start out with like a positive topic for once. Um, but there's quite a lot to just like talk about in general. I'd love to hear your views. The Ethereum ETF, um, obviously, like a very good thing in very many ways. Like I think in general, just the like seeing the sort of global regulatory environment demonstrate that they see beyond just Bitcoin, I think is like somehow it feels quite good.
I think that's a very charitable interpretation, but keep going.
I agree. I agree. But like regardless of what the actual intentions behind or whatever are, what it does do is open the door for a lot more of these things to happen over some period of time. So I think that's super positive. But I have this like really big question of like why? Like I've never seen anything be less telegraphed from
Uh,
the
I
regulator's
we
perspective.
we've I think I see this just basically as another instance of what we have been discussing, which is that the uglier things look for the next election for the Biden administration, the more desperate they're going to get to make the market in general look pretty. And for whatever reason, Trump had decided to jump on the crypto bandwagon. I'm not sure if you saw the stuff that he was
I did, yeah.
saying. I mean, to the point of saying that he would.
Semi blatant
I mean,
whoring
dude, he
himself
was even
out.
saying that he would like pardon Ross Ulbricht and whatnot, like this, which is
Yeah.
it's is I think is going way above and beyond the goal of trying to appeal to the crypto people, right? I mean,
Oh,
I
but by the way, do you think pardoning Ross Ulbricht as is like a like like is there some like army of people who are gonna vote because of that?
it doesn't matter really. What matters is that whomever is advising him on like this is a grab bag of crypto related topics, the fed the talking point to him, right? And there are some of those things that the Biden administration is unlikely to touch, like the free Russell bridge thing. So what do? They go for the next thing. And oh no, we actually like crypto. Like trust me, I'm not just a senile old man. And I try to appeal to the kids who are likely to be holding this stuff. So they come in and it seems from everything that I have heard, this thing seems to have been very top down, and I'm not in touch with that space at all. So I have to take people at their word that basically, up until it came up, nobody had any idea that it might even happen. So if
I
so, then
really
it's
don't
just
think they
a
did.
top down decision from a panic administration that's worried about the upcoming election, which is par on is it's par for the thesis that we have been espousing for the last few months. So call it confirmation bias in my case.
But it's kind of crazy because like letting the ETF through is good. Like that is obviously like as a thing that is popular, but I don't think doing that actually gives anyone more faith in that administration's future stance towards the industry, right? Like even though Trump is all talk, uh somehow it is almost more believable that Trump might actually be supportive of the crypto industry than it is to believe that the Democrats would be.
Look, it doesn't really matter. I don't particularly care, frankly.
I
I
I don't either. I care that the ETF is out because like there's
Yes,
the floodgates are open. Like
exactly.
the Bitcoin ETF is a floodgate of a kind, but really it's a floodgate for Bitcoin. Like there's no guarantee that then equates to a lot of other floodgates, and that will help out like in so many ways, in legitimizing. Like the craziest thing, my sister um texted me last week, and she was at some like this one stock brokerage's like informational event on crypto, like this traditional
Oh,
like Nordic stock brokerage, and I was like, oh, okay. I don't know what to say exactly, but they had, so apparently the Stockholm, there's a whole bunch of instruments listed in Stockholm. um there's the like Bitcoin stuff, Ethereum stuff, Solana, stake
hmm.
Arb, um like Cardano, but like 8 or 9 assets that are not like insane to list. Like you can always debate Cardano, but like, you know from the perspective of an external
I'm
observer.
tired of debating Cardano, man. Cardano is not worth debating.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
I
like
mean,
wrestling with a pig, man. You end
some of
up
my
covering the shit, and
colleagues
the pigs
from
enjoy it.
Equilibrium took great offense at the description of Cardano as a smart contract platform like Ethereum. Anyway, that's sort of interesting in and of itself. But like, I think, first of all, Swedish people always know when they need to get in somewhere to make a buck. Got to give it to them. Um, Second of all, it is indicative of what will probably happen in the future. And the instruments themselves are actually quite intelligent. The fact that they're staked versions are
Mhm.
pretty smart. Um, and so if you imagine that kind of like, that door is now beginning to open globally, I think, with this. Like, there's this sort of waiting for the US to move, but then when the US moves, everyone
Yeah.
else moves faster. Um, and so I think that'll be a good thing, and it'll probably help with many regulatory things in general. Um,
Yes.
just because, like, so obviously, if you want to have these things listed, or like, if you want to launch a staked whatever coin thing in your own country, like there's going to be regulatory hurdles to doing that, but there's already precedents that's going to be possible. But even from the side of the projects, like, it's just going to start legitimizing the actual thing. Like, it's okay, we can have digital assets. It doesn't necessarily mean we're funding Russian weapon buying, like.
Look,
This is a question I got from a Finnish family office a couple of weeks ago. They were like, but so isn't crypto used to fund, like, isn't Russia buying weapons with crypto? And I was like, surely Russia has better currencies to do that with. Like, I don't know, but so that's my point, is like, the effect of this is non-trivial when it comes to boomers. Like,
look,
on my parents see this stuff on their stock brokerages, suddenly it's okay. It's like if a drug is in a pharmacy, it's fine,
yeah.
like that kind of thing.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that aspect, mostly because my parents are old enough that they're not like in looking into the space at all, so I don't have that perspective. But look, to me, it's not even like I said, I didn't really care if the Biden administration is going to get better, assuming that they win and keep like get a second term. For all I know, they can go back and shitting on the crypto industry, 6 months in. We don't know. The thing is, if the SEC
They
does,
haven't actually changed their rhetoric. They've just
uh,
changed
they have in some
this
things.
one
For
action.
instance, the Biden had stated that if Fit 21 got approved, he would veto it. That he's no longer saying that. That is a change in rhetoric, right? Um, so there are some changes, and I expect more of them as things get more dire, right? But the thing is, whatever reasoning they end up using behind the Ethereum ETF, now there's a precedent. Because it's not just, oh, it's Bitcoin was this immaculate conception thing, this. You
Yeah.
actually need to describe, when you have two things, now you have a framework, right? And there's a third thing that may fit in that. So that
Yeah,
is when things are going to get interesting. It's going to become a
exactly.
lot harder for them to say, oh no, these two things did fit this framework,
They're
but that
special.
third thing that is almost the same stuff doesn't. So, for
Yeah.
instance, you may end up not having staked Solana ETFs. And I'm not saying that Solana is going to be like the next one down the road or something, but at some point, if this gets approved, you're going to get a Solana one, or you're going to get a, I don't know, man, the Doge ETF, who knows what the fuck. But you're going to end up getting ETFs for things that look like assets as long as they fit that description.
Do I have a prediction that I'm personally not happy about, but I want to hear yours first. What's the next one that gets an ETF in the US?
I would bet that is something completely dumb like Doge, actually, something that has, what would you go for? No, tell
XRP.
me, XRP? Nah, nah.
Who?
With the
Okay.
amount of, I gotta assume that there's enough people at the SEC right now who would basically have a massive chip on their shoulder about XRP.
Well, they
I
have the chip on the shoulder about everything, and so I don't disagree with that. My thinking here is mainly like, now that the Ethereum ETF is out, what organization is going to throw endless money at this thing to make it happen? And I suspect it is in fact Ripple.
Okay, from that point, from that aspect, yes. I am looking at this as more of what has the smaller attack surface, and I would think that the smaller attack surface is something completely dumb
Ripple
like Doge.
Ripple will hire everyone from
Yeah, sure.
the SEC. They'll make it happen.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a different thing.
it's
Ripple
silly.
has the attack surface, but they can hire people to defend it.
Yeah, it's silly. Like it. BNB is not gonna get it right. Like
Yeah.
obviously there's a limit to that, but Ripple, while being obviously fighting with the SEC, they're still within that system and they're quite embedded within that system. And
Hmm.
I would say that they're actually fairly good at navigating, considering what it is they're
Well, yeah.
offering. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. I mean, I don't really care either way. I would love to see a lot more of these. The
And hell, man, if there's a Ripple ETF, then anything goes.
Yeah, man. um, but I'll just pull it up what they have on the Stockholm exchange, because I suspect these are actually quite possibly like pretty close to the right ones to some degree, at least. So they have a top 10 index in Swedish kroner and euro, or as priced in Swedish kroner and euro. I don't know how the hell you would have a Swedish kroner crypto index. Is like no liquidity, no volume, but whatever. They have staked Ethereum, they have Bitcoin, they have staked Polkadot, which is kind of surprising. They have Chainlink, not surprising. Staked Solana, Arbitrum, staked Polygon, staked Cardano. Like, that's not actually a bad set. Like it's not the set that I would choose,
Yeah.
but it's not bad. Like it's actually pretty good. Like from the perspective of like if people like flood in because they want to get into crypto and they don't do any research and they just put money into that stuff, like those are like okay.
Seems
Like you're not going to make any
borderline.
money on Polkadot. You're not going to probably make any money on Link. You're probably not going to make any money on Polygon, or all of that's less clear. Um, I don't know. Well, I'm tempted to say you're not going to make any money on any of those, but regardless, like
It seems
those are like
borderline like
fairly credible projects, all of them.
I would say that those are fairly large market cap projects because you threw Cardano in there. That's has fairly little credibility with anyone who's not a cultist, I would say. I mean, it
So
has.
with yeah. So what I'm saying, like in aggregate, right? Like Cardano, agreed,
Yeah.
but like like it. BNB is not in there. There's not like Tron isn't in there.
Well, okay, sure, but that's it's like the strawman argument of crypto, man.
But whatever the case, I think that's pretty cool.
Man, it's a good thing overall.
Yeah, and it will be really interesting to see. Like, one thing I've been thinking about is in terms of capital inflows. Um, I wonder if the ETH ETF will eat from the Bitcoin capital inflow pie, or if it's a completely separate. I mean, of course, it's going to be both, but like, I wonder where more weight is. Like it. Like, are people looking at this as like this? They're just allocating to crypto as an industry, or are people looking at it as allocating to specific assets? And I think that's an interesting question.
Huh. Yeah, good question. I would guess that anybody with the general knowledge to actually make a distinction beyond just, or let's put a market cap way asset value on each, right? Anyone with the technical knowledge to actually make a distinction portfolio wise between those things would already be working on the crypto space. So I would imagine that this is more for traditional asset managers who are just going to find some external metric like market cap and then just go with it. So anyway, to answer your question, I would see it as people allocating to crypto in general. Maybe this encourages to allocate a larger amount to crypto in general, but it's going to be generally coming out of that pocket. And I don't expect this to be beyond the percentage of market cap. In fact, from the numbers I recall from Hong Kong, it was slightly below the market cap proportion that went into the Ethereum ETF.
Hmm. Yeah. So just to clarify, you think broadly speaking, a lot of it will basically come from some sort of more general crypto allocation pie, and in that way
Yes.
will eat into the Bitcoin capital inflows.
It wouldn't necessarily eat into the
Or
Bitcoin
depends
capital
on
inflows
if they've deployed.
even if they've already deployed, there is a chance that this convinces people to increase the slice of their assets that go towards crypto, right? Because the one thing that I do think this does, from the eyes of traditional asset managers, is that it de-risks crypto as a space in general, right?
Yeah.
If you look at again, this helps you establish a framework. There's the risks crypto as a space. There is a, there's a reduced chance that they may go out and step on the neck of institutions that are building upon Bitcoin, which makes you more likely to just put money in the space as a whole.
Yeah, and one kind of framing for this, which is I think somewhat interesting, is that there now is a path to sort of the equivalent of a traditional IPO. It's not like a traditional IPO in the sense of how stocks are done, but like a path from like we're launching a token to it's going to be traded on the Nasdaq now exists, which is
Interesting. I hadn't thought
interesting.
about that.
It's interesting, and it in fact does not include the project listing it on Nasdaq, which
Yeah,
is also interesting, because it it is more like a commodity or something like that, in terms of how the market structure functions. Like there's some company in different jurisdictions that kind of handles the underlying asset and then offers the trading product.
interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Good point. And
And
it's kind of
I would assume that from a traditional perspective, like traditional investors, this greatly increases the return profile for early stage investments.
yeah, okay. Maybe again, I would imagine that the people who are allocating early stage to crypto have a very different profile from traditional investors. But
Well, early stage is maybe a vague term here. I don't necessarily mean like seed startup stuff because that's kind of pretty generalized across tech. Like but I mean like if you're investing sort of Series B to Series D before like a public token launch, like it's no longer the public token launch that is like the main thing you're looking at. You can look at a much longer kind of
Yeah.
trajectory into like sort of global traditional public markets. And that would probably increase valuations, which
So you're
I don't know if
saying,
that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that's probably what's going to happen. Like Tiger Global or the equivalents will be back. you know?
I've always taken that as a given that when things get bubbly, we're gonna get tiger-like looking deals. But yeah, but you're right. This might bring money into the token side of things that otherwise would not have necessarily felt as comfortable coming into the token side of things.
Like you can see like an opportunity now for some investor who has like a very good understanding of what's required to get these assets listed in some important jurisdictions. Maybe that understanding is less of an understanding and more of an understanding with the people who decide. But whatever it is, there's an opportunity for some investor to just plow like incredible amounts of money at like relative, sort of like late stage in terms of crypto deals, but early stage in terms of like the path to having like an ETF listed, and seeing the arbitrage there. It'll take a little bit of time, I think, simply because like we need to see how the public market kind of valuations turn out
Yeah.
over time. Like it's super early days, but I can fully like I think that strategy would actually work. Like if you're a soft bank, when you were doing this stuff, like they were going in a little bit too early, and they didn't have like as clear of a path to this kind of stuff, which is more their bread and butter. But now, like like you can go to like foundations that have a token out already and just be like, hey, we'll get you an ETF, sell us tokens at a 30% discount.
Okay, that's a longer discussion because I expect that the problem with the SoftBanks and the Tiger Globals was not that there wasn't a clear path for these things. It's just that they were investing at valuations that were just absolutely stupid and for too large a chunk of the supply. So it doesn't strike me more as that they have a path to something mass market. Just the numbers that they were plugging into their equations basically made no sense, and I wondered how much
You
of that was just management fees.
you say that, but that's kind of a backward looking thing. We don't know yet if the valuations they invested at made sense or not.
Okay, if
Like
this is
like
crypto,
I'm
if you wait long enough, chances are
Yes,
something
if
will
you do
move.
it peak bull market, you're probably getting a not great deal. So
But
we can agree on that.
that's pretty
But
much what they were doing. At least Tiger, I don't recall SoftBank, but at least Tiger Global was
yeah,
a them coming into a deal was a very clear sign that things were just going way out of control. I remember that there was a time that they were like Tiger Global announcements coming out pretty much weekly, or Tiger Global led rounds announcements at the same time that we got, I don't know, Zuckerberg's sister dancing to "We're All Gonna Make It." So that's market toppy right there, man.
I agree with that. I agree with that. But my point is only that like it is frequent in crypto that valuations that look bonkers at some part of the cycle or in a previous cycle turn out to be not that bonkers later on. Um,
Look, and if your thesis was that, I still don't buy it. If your thesis was that you're going to be investing on these assets for with a multi-cycle outlook, then I agree. But then I wouldn't have been putting the money on the things that they were putting it, like
yeah.
just like dumb as NFT multiverse sell land to people projects and stuff that you just knew 90 something percent of them weren't going to last more than one cycle. right?
Yeah.
And the ones that survive, chances are not going to be the category's winner because of how quickly things change in the space. So if you want to go that route and go that route with like Ethereum, Solana, like layer ones, or maybe fundamental things, like you want to invest on Eigenlayer in that way, like sure, knock yourself out. This is probably going to take 10 years to play out. On most of the stuff that they were deploying, I don't think it's justified.
Yeah, that's fair. Um, that's entirely fair. Anyway, we probably handled that topic. Should we just quickly touch on the Eigenlayer advisory grants?
We can. It's actually related to a concern of mine. So you
Okay.
want to start? Should I go?
I'll give the background. So that it recently came out that I think 2 or 3 members from the Ethereum Foundation had like sizable Eigenlayer positions. We're talking like 7 figures allocations for advisorship roles. And this caused a big brouhaha. I think partly because it wasn't disclosed
It
like
only came out.
voluntarily.
It only came out because Kobe started hinting about it, and then people were like, "Oh yeah, by the way,
Yeah, and then they were like, we weren't keeping it a secret. We just didn't see it as important." And it's like, okay. Anyway, so that caused the whole thing. And like the how it sort of happened was a big part of why it became such a big brouhaha. But there is sort of like an underlying philosophical question, which is very reasonable to debate. Like I don't know, like one instance of something like who cares actually. Um, but the philosophical question is kind of like, should leading figures in sort of the different L1 ecosystem or protocol foundations, especially the Ethereum foundations, should they get significant incentives from specific projects, or should they accept them, given that any single project, like the worry is that they will then do things in a way that benefits that projects and essentially pushes out possible competition. So I think that's the concern. The other concern is just a more vague kind of like, shouldn't they in general be neutral and look at protocol design from that perspective, and not have bags essentially. um, and just a tiny bit more context historically, like I don't know any of the numbers, but what I've heard from a large amount of people over the years is that the Ethereum Foundation pays very badly. Um, like extremely badly, these people. So this, I think it is important context for this, because like these people who are like in major positions for a $500 billion blockchain, they get paid like an order of magnitude worse than like some smart contract developer and some shitty NFT project.
yeah."
And so that there is like there is that. But I want to pose it to you to start off. Like, is it okay for these types of deals to be done? Well, let's just start there.
Look, first of all, look, it's not something that I would take if I were in that position, just because having that sort of incentive is going to fuck with the way you think. Period. And I've personally, one thing that I keep telling founders, and I've had to tell this to 2 or 3 people, and one of them that who didn't
Wait,
listen and then realized,
wait,
sorry.
wait, 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 wait. For everyone else, having bags fucks with the way they think, except for us. Except for
Uh,
us.
well, actually, the main thing that I do with my bags is that I disclose them right away. That basically, at the very least, those people, if it's fucking with my mind, this is what's fucking with my mind. And anyway,
This is the
where I was
direction
that
my mind is getting fucked.
yeah, the what I kept telling founders is that it's not enough to do things correctly It needs to be obvious that you're doing things correctly. I One issue here is the fact that they're taking this bribe, right, which is a bribe, and you can't argue that it's not a significant thing. I don't know how well the Ethereum Foundation pays, but Justin Drake on his disclosure, he didn't say it was no biggie. He basically said this grant is, even though it's locked, it's likely going to end up being valued more than all of my other assets put together. So this is not somebody just bump your pay by 10%, which already would be an incentive for most people. This is you more than double my net worth.
This is life-changing money in one
This is
go.
life-changing money. So now, should people take these things or not? The question is irrelevant, pretty much, because the only difference is going to be how good people have to get at hiding it. So that to me is the only change that is likely to happen if you start tutoring that they shouldn't. I do think that when people take them, they should disclose it, and they should disclose it right away. And I would actually think that the way that Justin Drake went about it, that while he didn't, okay, the way they went about it, only disclosing it once Kobe called them out was wrong. But once he did decide to disclose it, disclosing the magnitude of the amount, I think, is relevant, right? No, I think at
Yeah,
very least, I think it's the right way to go about it.
they saved themselves a lot of pain by being quite honest in the disclosures once they made them.
I
Like had they
think
tried to
Justin
like play
Drake
it
was the
down,
only. I think Justin Drake was the only one who was that forthcoming. I remember, I might be fuzzy on this, but I think Dankrad Weiss was a little bit more, oh, this is not going to affect my perspective on the Ethereum thing. It was a little bit more wishy-washy. Trust me, I can be trusted with this life-changing money kind of thing.
yeah, yeah.
And again, for all I know, these are the people with the most mental fortitude and the biggest capability of compartmentalization that I have ever seen. But I'm going to assume that they are normal human beings, and this is going to fuck with their thought process. But I'm not an Ethereum fundamentalist, and I'm not as invested in the ecosystem. It is a concern because this to me is a sign of something that I have been seeing. And I just came back from Berlin Blockchain Week a week back, and I must have been pitched about 3 different Ethereum scalability things. Plus, someone asked me for my opinion on a fourth, and none of them are calling themselves layer twos nor sidechains, but it's pretty much the same general, let's say, direction.
Eigenlayer AVS, you mean?
That's part of it as well in there. And Eigenlayer is actually, and a whole discussion about Eigenlayer being a contract on top of Ethereum is relevant to this. I think this was on episode 28. So if anybody wants to hear more about that, go check that one out. I'm not going to go into it again. But basically, this helped drive the point home that I, for a while, and it's connected also to our discussion on the shared sequencer a couple of episodes ago. But basically, I'm starting to fear that there is a ton of money, like an order of magnitude of money more, being poured into like peripheral solutions to try and make Ethereum behave something like a modern chain that is actually being poured into Ethereum itself. It seems almost to be like this inverted pyramid where things are getting really top heavy, and at the very least, comparatively speaking, low amounts are going invested into the base layer. And I don't know, that is a concern considering the amount of money that Ethereum is securing right now. A good positive thing about
I
this
mean,
is that, as we've mentioned, they move slow, so they're unlikely to make major mistakes because they're careless. But still, the fact that these people need to go basically up the stack in order to actually get paid is a concern.
yeah. Yeah, I kind of broadly agree with you on like the basic thing of like this is going to happen no matter what. Like as a proposition for someone, like if you imagine that it was you, you're doing this like crucial work, you are very like high exposure publicly, like a lot of stuff is kind of riding on your work, um and then you're not making that much, but then you get offered some like kind of advisory positions because of the work you're doing, that given the magnitude or given the importance of the work you're doing are and your exposure in doing the work are like financially very beneficial. Like who would kind of turn it down unless there was some explicit regulatory thing like you can't, or
Yeah.
you would be shunned forever, and they're not going to be shunned. Like they have some strange advisor positions as well, but not like fraudulent as such. Like an Eigenlayer is becoming very core to the strategy. So I'm not that worried about that. I mean, they should have definitely disclosed it ahead of
Yeah.
Kobe. Um,
Look,
but
this is the argument of if you don't pay people in civil service enough, they're just gonna
yeah,
basically either good people are not
they're
gonna
gonna,
go into civil service, or they're gonna go find outside sources of income.
yeah.
So
They
it's
will
I
they
think
will
it's
they will
essentially the
play
same
nice
thing.
with the banks so they get a cushy roll after they leave.
Exactly.
This is the
Um,
classic structure. But
just as an asterisk here, by the way, this is not just about are they going to benefit Eigenlayer versus competitors. I can't recall the exact date. It must have been September, October, but there was basically this panel of this online call panel of the dangers of risk taking. Actually, the dangers of risk taking alignment that
yeah.
featured 7 people, and Eigenlayer has now bought off 6 of them, and with the 7 being Vitalik. So it's not just are they going to benefit Eigenlayer. This is, I mean, this could be easily characterized as hush money.
Yeah, and this is part of why it was such a big brouhaha. I do want to maybe so I think we're both broadly in agreement. Like there are concerns here. There's probably a better middle ground in terms of pay. Like the Ethereum Foundation could pay better. I don't think they can pay so well that they would remove the incentive. In fact, I don't think it's useful for the Ethereum Foundation to pay so well that they get people who are motivated primarily by money. And in that sense, I think they've done relatively well. Like they do get people who are very motivated by other aspects, but it doesn't entirely remove the money motivation. Like it's just how it is. Um, but what I'm a touch concerned about, and maybe this is mainly because Ethereum or the Ethereum Foundation has historically been so good on this. Like this definitely happens in all ecosystems, but it is something that has sort of become distinctly more noticeable recently. Is they do seem to be taking sides a little bit. Like this is maybe the most blatant example, but they've also been promoting espresso a lot,
Yeah.
which is, by the way, an Eigenlayer AVS. Um, uh, and so like when the Ethereum Foundation, whether explicitly or just by like going on podcasts, like they always say they don't reflect the views of blah blah blah. Like sure, okay, but like in practice, like whether it reflects everyone's views, probably not, but it certainly reflects some kind of stance that there is, or at least a policy on whether you're allowed to do stuff like that or not. And that is a little bit concerning. Like the decisions are being kind of made by the Ethereum Foundation to some extent to like decide on winners. And
Yeah.
and that I think is potential,
Well,
it's a bad look because it greatly okay, I want to caveat this, like if there were other options, it would greatly disincentivize new people from entering the community, or new builders from coming into the community, because it's being essentially like it would look like it's being gate kept. Right now you can make the argument that there's not that many options. So, you know, like it is what it is. Like the Ethereum Foundation, I think, still remains maybe the best in terms of neutrality. Although now it's getting close. I would I would argue the Solana Foundation or the Solana people in general have not done things like this in the same way.
I was going to say, I have seen the Ethereum Foundation acting as kingmakers more than I have seen anyone on the Solana side of things. So
Yeah,
Solana people
Solana is the
seem
only
to. I mean,
other one that I can think of. Like every other ecosystem, and to be clear, this is partly like so like this kind of back channeling and king making whatever happens everywhere to some extent, and this isn't like I don't want to like. And I'm not even critical of it because if you're like a relatively early stage project compared to Ethereum or like an L1, like you kind of have to just get shit. Like you need to just have stuff happen. And sometimes that involves like negotiating something to make things happen. And so I'm not like critical of that. Like everyone is not in the position of Ethereum where things happen sort of semi organically. Is maybe my point. But given that's the case, it seems given that's the case with Ethereum, it seems strange that they are choosing like in a very simplified way, they are picking individuals whom to make rich, and that's and it's not by like organic community anything. It's like there, whether intentionally or not, there is an explicit decision which leads to that, and I think that is potentially harmful in the long term.
you're going to hear an argument here. If this were a company with no pretense of neutrality, say if this is Amazon picking if to use, I don't know, MariaDB or Postgres, whatever, right? Like, sure, go out, be a kingmaker, you're a company. If you have a pretense of neutrality, then you shouldn't be doing these things. I'm pretty sure the arguments are going to come that these things are done purely on technical merits and funding and whatnot. I don't really care. The point is, you are acting as a kingmaker. So, it is what it is. You need to. It is what it is. You need to be aware that this kind of thing is going on. It's now. It sounds like your concern is then about. It would likely discourage because this is not going to necessarily discourage somebody who's building a new text or something, but this is likely to discourage someone who is likely to consider building something that could be considered fundamental infrastructure for the future of Ethereum. You're saying that that is the case, basically. They're picking and choosing on that side.
Yeah, it's so. So the concern is like there's one. So let me just lay out kind of the two scenarios. Like it's not necessarily bad when thinking about the future of Ethereum. It might not be equitable, but it's not necessarily bad. So the next Eigenlayer, or whatever, like the next big thing is, right? Like I'm not talking about Eigenlayer specifically, but just like the next kind of similar middleware or something innovation. Whether they choose to build it on Ethereum largely depends on whether they can secure Ethereum Foundation support.
Sure.
and that's kind of a weird dynamic that's different from how Ethereum has been mostly since its inception. Because if you don't get Ethereum Foundation support, you have to assume that some competitor probably will.
Yeah. Like I had this conversation. I had a few interesting conversations actually at Berlin Blockchain but I had this brief conversation with someone from Ethiopia. And I basically, mostly because I knew somebody else who had been, I was just having a conversation with somebody who had been talking to me about the Nigerian market. I asked her, so what does corruption look like in Ethiopia? And she said, well, yeah, there's quite a bit of it, but corruption isn't necessarily bad. It means that you just know that things have a price and you know how to get things done. So it seems like you're suggesting that that's how the foundation is going. Basically, you need to find who the right person is and hopefully they stay bot after, right? Hopefully they're honest and stay bot. You need to find out who the right person is to give you the thumbs up that your approach is going to be the anointed one.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, this is how the traditional world operates, right? Like whether it's formalized as donations or just
I
straight up
thought we were here
corruption.
to break away with all those things, Temu. Are you saying that this is still human beings being human beings? No, it isn't so.
Dude, you know how I feel about this. We're gonna rebuild all the same shit. It's
Yeah.
it's this is
And
the world is much more Sisyphean, if that's a word, than it is. I don't know what the term would be where the boulder actually gets pushed up the hill. um, but yeah, I mean, like we have. I feel like there's a more general kind of like digital innovation cycle here, which is one where we on some cycle rebuild the infrastructure, and we make some things better, um, but like ultimately the power structures are kind of organically emergent, and so they don't fundamentally change, or at least they're we don't have a clear view of how to fundamentally change them, because it comes down to how individual humans behave, and individual humans behave in fairly predictable but hard to control ways.
yeah. Plus, we also have the situation that I think we have discussed ourselves. I can recall if we discussed on the pod or not. That I am concerned about how the easy early exit in crypto can encourage more sociopathic behavior than you would actually even get on traditional companies. But that's a longer discussion.
But the ETF pathway may actually improve that, interestingly.
I'm not
It
sure that's the
may.
case because why would you risk that if you're a manipulative
Not
bastard?
now. Not now. But my point, so one example, um, if that path becomes more clear and more standardized, and like it's easier to understand what it takes to get there, you can see, um, like the founder core team incentive structures changing to facilitate that more long-term thing, because right now there's not really much, but I,
We'll see.
I mean that could be the case
I'm unsure.
anyway, and it's not, but
That would basically be people applying shackles to themselves that they have no need to apply, and I've never seen
true.
that being the case.
Well,
The
the investors
the
can enforce them at some point potentially, but it
You're
depends
right,
on how easy it is for the investor to make money, whether they want
and
to or
so
not.
far investors in crypto have shown themselves to be so reasonable with these things. As long as they get out, they're fine with everybody else getting out. Forget it. It's not. Anyway, that's a longer rant. Let's not go there. Even
Okay,
though it is one of the things that why I've been thinking about this is because I ran into Niklas as well, and one of the things that he asked me,
from Equilibrium, you mean?
yes, and in conversation he asked me like, so what concerns you about crypto right now? And I went on to a few things, including
I'm sure
the.
you ranted no end.
No, I mean, I kept it relatively constrained, and I think he has heard some of this on the pod, including the sociopathic behavior due to the early exit, where people just try to gain as much as they can before the next cycle, and then this basically this issue that this can corrupt even people who up until recently had been builders, like what is going on with Mango, right? I mentioned those two things, but then it got and we I'm not going to go into the Mango thing. We can just post a link to the Twitter thread. But then this got me thinking about the Ethereum Foundation issues, and this basically being this basically being top heavy. Basically, I suspect this is going to end up becoming the XKCD cartoon of the tiny open source supporter. So I'm really afraid that this is going to end up being an open SSL heartbleed thing, only with trillions at stake. But Anyway, what I'm curious then, what concerns you about crypto right now?
Me.
Yeah,
Oh, there's no concerns. It's
it's all
just
beautiful, super
everything is
cycle, up only.
oh yeah. It's a one-time opportunity. It's never happened before in history.
Yes, and
That
this
was a
will
joke,
break
by the
all
way.
the usual power structures, and we
Oh
are
yeah.
going to be also living in a silver domed utopia just after the next cycle.
Yeah, with some like with Elon's brain stored in a vat managing the society. Um
I would be more than happy to see any part of Elon's stored Nevada that keeps him away from society as a whole.
I think well that's a different topic, but so maybe I won't get into it. Um what concerns me right now, I mean we did talk a lot about a lot of them. I mean, there's a huge amount of things. Like really, like the my concern overall, which I kind of tried to measure in some way, is like is like it is crypto net positive,
Hmm,
or maybe more accurately, like will it or can it be net positive? Um, given that oftentimes you kind of need to extrapolate out to some degree. Um,
that's interesting.
and I think like it's a tricky equation because there's so many scammers. I think if there were less scammers, it would be much easier to make the equation. Um, but I kind of come down to, generally speaking, I do not think that it is a functional structure where we have a lack of governance, transparency, and like kind of like hidden dictatorships making decisions in the traditional world. And there's some of that in crypto, but there is considerably more transparency. Um, and you do have the ability to change the decision making structure in a way which is impossible in traditional world. So that's kind of what I come back to. In terms of like active concerns, or this is sort of like a passive concern. In terms of active concerns, which is a great segue to the thing I wanted to chat about next, AI and crypto.
Oh,
Um, yeah.
Uh, sorry, before we get to that, let me just make a comment on that, that on the net positive thing. Interestingly, that's something in which I think I'm a lot more positive about. Even if the scammers and the former builders turn treasury drainers and the sociopaths, even though this whole things drive me up a wall, mostly because I see it as my ecosystem, and it annoys me to no end that these things happen in my ecosystem, because I feel if I get too involved, my head is going to explode with annoyance. But every time that I get a story about, someone from some African country paying with Bitcoin for their turkey suppliers, that they also get textiles from somewhere else, or the trains from Shenzhen, and this thing is actually enabled by crypto that just wouldn't exist anywhere else. Anybody who puts money in a rug had it coming. They should have done their diligence. The fact that crypto can enable these things happening to me makes it a massive net positive. Yeah, there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of scammers, but there's a lot of that in the meat space as well. They just no longer get as politicized. So, anyway, carry on.
Yeah, well, just quickly, I do agree with that. And this is like a fairly small thing, but one thing that I really appreciate is that the crypto industry, broadly speaking, offers employment opportunities globally, and that I think is quite a fascinating dynamic in many ways. So there, it really doesn't, and this isn't even like it's not like really something that crypto itself facilitates. It's almost more of a cultural thing. Crypto does also facilitate like some of the money flows and things like that, but it's more like how it sort of is structured in terms of employment. it really makes no difference where you are, and you can work in crypto. You can also often get paid rates which would be preposterous in your local jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Things like you could argue that that kind of stuff is not sustainable. It'll all get like competed away and made more efficient and whatever. But that's just cool. Like, you work with people from all over the world. You go to something and you meet people from all kinds of weird countries. Like it's incredibly distributed, like no other industry is, because it's like kind of the when the internet was being created and the companies that were built on top of the internet, they still kind of operated on the traditional model of like have everyone in the office. And with our current web companies, there's these offices exist in very specific cities that like everyone is in. um and that's just like not the case. Like you can do the same thing in the traditional world, but it's just like it's not built into kind of the cultural fabric in the same way. um and this doesn't benefit everyone or anything like that, but it does mean that there's sort of like for people like I was when I was young, which was like very internet savvy, relatively technology savvy, and like you know entrepreneurial and curious. um you can kind of get involved whether you're in like Bangladesh or Africa or South America or whatever. And I think that's like a it's not employment for all the world's people. That's not what I'm saying, but it is sort of like this quite an optimistic idea that like you're no longer so location constrained in terms of your options for work and earning a living.
Look, even after, even if after the internet was a thing, like say 20 years ago in Costa Rica or something, the if you were a developer constrained to the local market for whatever reasons, including that the Costa Rican passport is shit, right? Then your options in actual software development were rather limited. You had to,
And it didn't really matter how good you are.
nope.
Like you're in a range, and that range is a Costa Rican range.
It,
And
it's even worse. It's no matter. It doesn't really matter how good you could have gotten at some point, because there's not only a certain range, but there's a certain amount of challenge that that market is going to impose on you, which is makes it less likely that you're going to develop talents that you otherwise would have developed if you were exposed to more people and to bigger problems. And if there's something that crypto has definitely done, is that even for people who have, say, knowledge that you would say was relatively niche before, right? Like you and I have discussed how people who seem to work really well with crypto are people with kind of like embedded systems design and very low level knowledge. This would have been a relatively low, let's say, a low demand skill set. You would have had a lot of developers competing for who gets to write the firmware on this particular heartbeat monitor or something. Right now, these people get to apply that in a much wider and much more fast-paced environment. And yeah, I find that thing exceedingly cool.
yeah, that's true. Like there's a lot of people from the hard sciences working in the industry. um yeah, and there's a lot of technology areas which require the most expertise but don't pay the best. And those people are typically like great candidates for this kind of stuff. Like they are in fact the most knowledgeable on like the very low level stuff. But the traditional world doesn't give a shit about the low level stuff. They care about monetizing eyeballs with ads. And so then there's this dynamic. But yeah, moving on. So my concern, crypto and AI. um as a it's not a disclosure, but as like a caveat, um I'm sure many investors who have invested in my companies or whatever are invested in crypto AI things. And so I don't and like I understand why, but my concern is that the crypto AI thing is going to be the biggest sort of money grab thing of this cycle,
Yeah.
because it's just completely not real. Like a colleague of mine, one of the who's an investor, he was like, gonna like we were talking about our sort of portfolios for this cycle. And when I talk about my portfolio, it's not my portfolio, it's like whatever equilibrium portfolio. Um, and yeah, it was like, oh yeah, like Ethereum, whatever, Solana, blah blah blah, all the like basics, couple of potential like bigger winners, blah blah blah, and then a little allocation to just whatever has AI in the name. and and he was, and what drives me nuts, um, is that like that probably works.
If you have the right exit strategy.
Yes, but we've already seen examples of that working, and
Sure.
and this is not vaporware. Vapor is far too substantial to describe what they have in
Well,
actual fact.
I actually think that the ocean is kind of like at the vapor level now, not like when they came out, which was basically a loose description of potential molecules.
That may or may not exist in
Yeah,
reality.
that you may or may not be able to hire for somebody who can bond them. So
But yeah, so this was brought to my mind because of this recent thing that was on CoinDesk today, which is that Fetch AI, which is, I think, mainly funded by that one British VC slash
Outlier
other
Ventures.
fucking thing. Yeah, I'm not going to say anything more on that. Singularity Net and Ocean Protocol are going to merge their tokens into the Artificial Super Intelligence Alliance token.
Yeah. So okay, for what it's worth, since someone just said the word today, today is May 30th. Actually, the announcement that came out today is that they set
Oh no,
out the
this came out
date.
yesterday, so 29th.
Okay, yesterday, fine. But the announcement was just basically the date of when the bullshit train leaves Dump on Gullible People Station. They had been actually talking about this for a couple months. In fact, I remember because when I originally saw the announcement, it wasn't from that date, it was from March 27th. But when I originally saw the announcement was on April 1st. And I was like, is this an April Fool's joke? Like, no, okay, it's from a few days ago. This is an actual thing that is happening. Yeah.
um and so like it's an example of that behavior. There's been many others. There's a whole bunch of projects which have launched, and they fall into a couple of different categories. They might be like coordinating hardware for AI stuff, um or I don't know, whatever, like training some meta model, blah blah blah. And like there may be real technology under these things, and whatever. um but there's sort of like a fundamental there's some like really fundamental issue I have with the fact that like people will people will buy it even if there's nothing. And that causes issues, because if someone is actually doing something that is reasonable, they get sort of they're most likely to spend the least on marketing out of a cohort
Yep.
of companies where everyone else is doing nothing except marketing. um, and so it gets extremely noisy. and it's just not like it's not real. They don't do like what is the point of this? Like I sort of on a philosophical long-term thing, I 100% think it is ideal to try to get AI models onto blockchains in some way. But like
And for what it's worth, that is not what any of these three things do as far as I know.
well,
Okay,
these
first of all,
three, but also none of the other ones that say they're doing this stuff.
yeah.
This
I mean, like, I don't recall what Singularity Net does. Ocean Protocol was, I think, I can't recall if they first launched it as a market for private data analysis for your own personal data and then pivoted into something else. And then Fetch AI, they're basically doing on-chain stored agents, I think. I actually met one of the the Fetch AI founders some
can
year
you
back.
explain to me what an on-chain stored
Oh
agent
no,
is?
no, forget it. Like I'm not gonna go there. Like again, I looked at Fetch AI way back then because I keep bringing this up. I think autonomous agents are really interesting, and I think they have fairly little to do with on-chain. So I do think something like AO is likely to end up being a better approach for it, but we've gone over that before. Anyway, that's what these three are doing. There are some projects that are talking about on-chain model, but none of these basically. And if you even look at the history of some of these, like I recall that I may have said this before, but bear saying again because this is kind of like this is the kind of shit people shouldn't forget about. Ocean Protocol launched a token sale where they raised a stupid amount of money for this encrypted data analysis marketplace thing,
Which could have
and
just been centralized.
yeah, which could have just been standardized. But on top of that, at the same, I remember being at an event where the same thing, they were hyping the fundraising. They were also hiring for every position necessary to build that. That's like, we're going to open this great bakery as long as we get procurement for flour and a baker who actually knows how to cook stuff. This is the origin of some of these projects. I'm just going to reiterate the only financial advice I give people before you put money into any of these things, try to use them, see if there's anything there for you. If you can't use them or don't find anything there for you, reconsider.
Yeah. And there's one called Bit Tensor as well, which is like somehow trying to create artificial intelligence in subnets. I don't like
Bit tensor.
the, yeah, I think that's the biggest one in terms of market cap, but like
But that's
so
not going into this
so there
whole.
are real things that will probably be built in the crypto industry that intersect with or are applicable to the AI industry. A crude way of thinking about it is that if you're marketing primarily as like the platform for artificial intelligence in crypto, probably full of shit.
Yeah.
Like it's just like
Uh,
nobody even has a coherent explanation of what that means. Like the closest thing to coherence is essentially the modulus labs thing, which is like, look, we can prove an LLM with ZK, we can prove inference with ZK. Like, okay, then we could do some stuff where we have a model that's stored off chain, trained off chain, but then you, I don't know, do some investment strategy using it, and you just prove the inference on chain, um, or verify the inference on chain rather. And like maybe, but like we're so far away from reasonable models for that the vast majority of projects that are using that as their marketing pitches are trying to get people to buy their tokens so they token number go up so they can sell, and not because they're building something real.
Yep, I don't know, man. I've given up trying to. I've mostly given up. Clearly I'm still tilting at that particular windmill, but I've mostly given up trying to warn people away from these things. It is sad, as you say, that this does take attention away from people who are actually trying to build something workable, because there seems to be an inverse correlation between people between having people who are good at putting their nose down to the grindstone and working, and those people putting up with a vapor salesperson on their team. So it is unfortunate that that is the case. But anyway, and this also actually kind of seems to be of a, the Groucho Marx line that I wouldn't be part of any club that would have me as a member. Maybe there's something about that going on, that at the very least on this cycle, if there is an on-chain AI project that you have heard of, chances are you shouldn't be giving them your money. Just give it a bit. And again, if you're trading this stuff and you have an entry and exit strategy, you have a method, knock yourself out. Investment, multi-year things, think it through.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, in what's his name? Benedict Evans.
Oh,
Uh
Christ. Are we going to Benedict Evans now?
don't no. So just relax.
Arr,
um
arr.
this isn't a Benedict Evans specific thing, but in his newsletter, he had just a note on all the different AI rounds in the traditional industry. And he listed out a whole bunch of them. Let me just see if I can pull it up. There's a great line at the end. This is from the traditional industry, but it's sort of relevant to this. So he lists out there was a company called H in France, raised 220 million to build a new foundation model with a path to AGI, it claims. That's quite funny, by the way. For anyone who doesn't know, AGI is complete fiction as of right now. Nobody has any idea how we're going to get there. And anyone who says otherwise is lying. The Suno music maker raised 125, blah, blah, blah. Scale raised 1 billion. CoreWeave, which is AI data centers, which is maybe more reasonable. Like,
Sure, those are shovels during a gold rush.
yeah. And like you can assume that AI inference compute needs will continue increasing probably linearly. Like training compute will at some point just sort of disappear in the grand scheme of things because the models will get mature enough. But inference compute will stay. But they raised 7.5 billion in debt 2 weeks after raising 1.1 billion in equity, which is funny.
Nice.
That's money. That's money.
Nice.
You don't get that just by going to Sandy Hill Road and talking to some VCs.
Yeah.
You need to find some oil people or something like that. Anyway, his last line in this section is it seems possible that not all AI companies raising this year will return invested capital.
You don't say.
that is that is the most diplomatic way of saying that there's no way that all these valuations are anywhere close to reality.
Well,
But I actually generally speaking predict a kind of AI winter. Um, Not really an AI winter, but a sort of transition from I think there is currently the market is expecting exponential growth, and I think that's horseshit. I think we're actually very, very close to the level of model which kind of maximizes utility. Like it's already kind of fairly hard to tell the difference between GPT 3.5 and 4. Like if you didn't know which one it was and you asked it a question, like yes, you might be able to tell. I'm not saying it's like imperceptible, but like we're getting close. The differences are gonna be incremental.
so okay, I'm gonna
And that
guess.
holding true, if that is true, would mean that the market's expectations are way overkill. And what we're actually in for is like linear growth as it gets adopted across a whole wide range of things. And so you have like some kind of regression to the mean probably on that. It's not like AI is dead or anything, but it enters this part of the cycle, which is more like digitalization, like this 40-year process of companies thinking about how to do things.
Okay, I'm not going to guess on likely progression. I do think, for what it's worth, that people in every space, never mind AI, but first of all, people underestimate two things. One of them is the hidden work, right? Like by the time ChatGPT 3 came out, was like freaking alien technology because we had pretty much not seen the intermediate steps. So that is one thing, and then people underestimate, even not saying that what they're doing is trivial, because by no means it is, but even on a space, no matter how complex is your space, there is going to be low-hanging fruit for whatever the complexity of your space is, and
Yeah.
eventually you run out of low-hanging fruit to pick.
And right now they have a very high incentive to pick all their low-hanging fruit to
Yes.
maximize momentum.
So I wouldn't necessarily assume that these things are going to be linear. If I were to guess, I would basically assume that it's going to be more of a step function, where it basically looks kind of like flat for a while, and then it makes another jump because of whatever reason. Some other approach comes out, or then we find some new thing that we hadn't tried before, whatever it is. But I do not think that it's going to be continued linear growth. That is one thing. Where I do expect that we're going to see an AI winter is, and I've been warning investors who were stupidly deploying, like, I don't know, $250,000 checks on AI startups like a year and a half ago, is that I think that the middle ground disappeared again. You're going to have two people who come up with a completely different approach out of freaking nowhere on a lab, or you're going to have the multi-billion-dollar investment projects. Like the middle is gone.
So when I'm talking about linear, I'm talking about kind of like the market pricing the assets. So like Nvidia, for example. So I'm
Yeah,
not talking
exactly.
necessarily about how the technology will develop, right? Like I agree with you entirely that I think that's a very step function. Like you kind of you probably, how would I picture this? Like you have this sort of like very slow incremental improvement until you have another breakthrough, and the same thing, yeah. My point is rather that like the market impact of the even those breakthroughs will not be insane, I suspect. Um, and the reason is that like GPT-4, like with even if it had like considerably less loss, would still be fairly similar to like the average user. So you can do more things with it, or you can make it more efficient. And so yes, there's like an implication, but it's not like it's not like an exponential increase in market value of the asset. And it may definitely not be an exponential increase in terms of the market value of Nvidia, because Nvidia will be moving sort of, there's like some buildup of training compute capacity and inference compute capacity, and then once that is, then the additional compute capacity is basically all for inference and is relatively linear on this like adoption sort of digitalization style trend. um and so that's what I meant by regression to the mean, whereas like right now the perception seems to be that AI has gone like this and will continue going like this, even though the technology that we currently have to do it, we already know it can't go like this. Like far, like it's we're now at a point already where throwing more and more compute means we get like constantly smaller and smaller rewards, like diminishing returns on more and more compute. And it makes sense to do that as much, as long as VCs give you money or whatever, then you do want to do that so that you can sort of argue yours is the best or whatever. But like, but at some point you just have like okay, like it doesn't, like we're not that far from the point where it's like, okay, it doesn't make sense to throw more compute at LLMs, and then we're waiting for something else to happen. And what what a VC would argue is that once enough money goes into an industry, miraculously these new things happen, all the time. They just end up being all over the place. Like every time you open a door, there's another innovation. Um, and there is some truth in that. I think capital is a prerequisite for that to happen.
Yeah.
But I also think that more capital is not necessarily going to speed things up. And it's
Particularly
a valid
on a
question
space.
of whether there is a thing. Like this is the core issue: is people talk about AGI, and there are like 1,000 innovations between now and AGI, and they can't coherently explain even a single one of them because nobody knows any of them. And so, yeah, the expectations of investors have been built up in a way which leaves like no room for anything else besides a reversion to the mean.
Look, the thing that also people may want to keep in mind, generally speaking, is that capital has a huge impact when you need to be able to fund and attract talent to a space. And beyond that, you're basically just paying so that the competition doesn't steal away your good people, right? And you have got to assume that given that the way the AI companies have been going in the past year, something, chances are that anyone good in the space who was underfunded is now working on it and pretty well funded as well.
Yeah,
So there's only so much of that is going
life-changing
to
money funded if they're good.
yeah. So there's only so much of that buys you. This will likely have a sustained impact in the long run, right? Because this is going to make it more likely that someone with, say, a mind for mathematical models is going to go into working on the AI field, that they are to go into, I don't know, build a trading model for high frequency trading, for instance. So
Universities are more likely to produce AI related things because there is more obvious a commercialization path.
look, even if at the same level of production, somebody who may have to make a choice between those two things is not going to think, well, if I go down the AI side, I'm just going to be an academic putting out papers every so often and fighting for tenure, right? Now you can also get paid on that side, and that is going to have a very significant impact in 6 to 10 years down the road, I think. All right, but it's not a switch you flick right now and light happens.
Yeah. And by the way, this isn't a criticism. Like I do think we should fund it. So I'm
No,
not
yeah.
I'm exclusively looking at this with like an investor hat on. And my conclusion is nah, wouldn't buy.
Yeah, look, for me, it's very simple. As I mentioned, there's the two extremes. The two people in a garage, which I would be able to fund, and then there's the multi-billion investments, which sadly I do not have the pockets for. And
Or you can go public markets, but that's where it's very difficult to pay a reasonable price right now.
sure, but the thing with the two peoples in the garage is that anything relevant likely to come out of that is going to be so freaking alien compared to whatever else is going on that chances are I'm not going to be able to recognize it as something really relevant. And if I do recognize it, then that probably means that it's something that someone else is working on already, right? Like the chances of me getting that overlap of access to a good early stage AI opportunity that is going to make a dent in the universe and that I can afford are fairly slim. So it is from the investment point of view, it's definitely a space that I feel I can write off.
And you have this dynamic which always happens in these kinds of industries and happens a lot in crypto as well, where like a lot of the new AI companies are essentially just the people from the old AI companies that spin out to start their own company, right? So like
Yep.
X Google Mind, X DeepMind, X OpenAI, et cetera, et cetera. And then they often get the money from the same investors largely. So it's not like an easy game to get into anyway. Um, but yeah, so I think like I guess the meta point of all this is I think AI is actually very, very difficult to invest in, even if you believe that it's going to change a lot of stuff, which I do. I don't necessarily believe it's going to change stuff in the way that a lot of the AI people seem to. And there's another topic for another time, maybe within there, which is like why is it that experts in a field are often so blind to objective reality? I know obviously, well, objective is a strong word here, but
I wouldn't necessarily.
surely if you understand how AI works, you should also be able to recognize that this is not AGI, and we shouldn't give it to the governments exclusively.
I wouldn't. Okay, that is a long discussion because
Yeah,
first of all,
we
it
don't need
depends on
to
who
have
you
it now.
define as experts in the field. But I would say that if you are, let's say, a recognized voice in a field, there tends to be a disincentive of not jumping on the bandwagon because you don't want to be left out from the interviews and the consulting fees and all that kind of stuff. So there's a certain, let's say, there's incentive of you saying like, oh, we're close to AGI because that makes you more relevant. And if for whatever reason we do not reach AGI in the next weeks, well, it's not your fault. It's those people who fucked up at building it, right? So I suspect it's an
I'm
incentive thing,
so
not an
I'm doing
intelligence thing.
something completely different. But by the way, AGI is very close, and I'm happy to talk about
Yes,
it.
just please do raise my profile.
Yeah, yeah, but this is something I've been thinking about, um, and it relates to a broader point, which I would actually love to just in closing get your thoughts on, which is like if you think about investments outside of crypto, sort of just the possible investment space in general. Um, where would you look in general for good investments? Because, well, I'll come back to my thoughts on it, but I'd love to
Oh
hear.
wow, tricky because the main issue is that my brain has been so wholly consumed by crypto in the last 6 7 years that I have looked at other stuff less and less and less. Are we talking where would I be looking into at say my check size, or where would I be looking if I just had a Andreessen Horowitz money?
No, just like as an individual.
The problem is
So,
that a lot of
like,
the
I mean,
interesting.
an individual like us, so we can do some like angel tickets into things. Obviously, we're constrained. Like, we're not going to be doing angel tickets into like the best biotech companies because they don't give a shit. Um,
And
but
can
there's
you
like some.
recognize them? That's another issue, right?
Can anyone? I don't know.
I'm pretty sure someone from the space can. But
Yeah. But so this is kind of, but I'm talking about just in general, like maybe like more areas because I feel like I very much believe that like technology will continue to be like the biggest kind of motor for growth across the world. But it seems to me like technology investments are actually relatively poor. Reason being is I think they're all significantly overvalued. um, and this is especially apparent with AI, uh, but like is visible elsewhere as well. Like if you look at stock market, you're a tech company. It doesn't matter what you do. Your multiples are an order of magnitude higher than if you're an energy company or something like that. Which probably makes sense because your like theoretical earning potential is better, um, but it's like fairly hard to come up with anything that feels investable right now. And maybe this is maybe this is a function of there just being an overall asset bubble. Um, but it does feel that way, and so it's fairly hard to allocate capital in like a holistic way. In crypto, it's slightly easier in some ways because you just wait till the bear market and then you buy, and then you wait till the bull market and then you sell. Like,
Look, I agree. Look, the crypto has two huge advantages for me. Again, one is that since I've been in the space so much, it's mostly about forcing myself to narrow down my focus to the things that I know I can keep track of. Right. Like I think we had this conversation where on the past cycle, one of my mistakes was that as I was living next, so I came up with my own investment thesis and like these are the things that fit it. And while the thesis was generally correct, there were about 3 times as many things in there that I could have kept track of. Right. So one of the first things that I did was when I noticed that was start paring down that to the essentials. Right. So crypto does have the advantage that okay, there's that line of put all your eggs in one basket and then really watch that basket. Crypto allows me to do that.
I think it. I don't know who said it originally, but what's his name? Stanley Druckenmiller or
Druckenmiller.
something is. Yeah.
So anyway, crypto does have the advantage, and then the other thing is that the other areas in which I would like to invest, of the things that I'm interested on, either they're too susceptible to external forces, like if you want to invest in wine or something, like climate change, chances are it's going to fuck with you before you even get to the point where that's a payable investment, and or are areas where I just basically don't have the knowledge to evaluate the investment. Like say I would like to invest in things that are like life extension and general health, right? I don't have the knowledge to evaluate any of that stuff. So I would be a lot more likely to just allocate capital on dollar cost averaging to like a basket ETF that buys into that thing, so I don't have to worry about it. So
Yeah. Interestingly, so I kind of like I kind of feel that like that's sort of my natural pull as well, is to invest into futuristic things. But then I look at their economics for the like the publicly traded ones, and I'm just like, what the fuck is this? Like
oh yeah,
this is not a sustainable company at all. And
yeah.
so what ends up happening is I end up buying like uh in the stock market. Obviously crypto is crypto, but in the stock market I end up buying like energy companies, banks, like fucking like food distributors, like all this like really really old school stuff.
You mean the old cool stuff that has an actual business model?
Yeah, yeah, so my current strategy is essentially um to try to pay the smallest, like in terms of market price, to pay the smallest market price compared to the dividends that they pay out consistently over time.
Your
um
price earnings ratio minimizer.
Essentially, yeah, it's a touch, like it's touch more complicated, but like yeah, that's the basic idea. um and my thesis is basically just like, I don't know if these stocks are going to go up or down, like in market price, because who the fuck knows? But these guys have very low multiples and they pay very high dividends. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna like if like I can like read their income statement and be like, okay, I understand. And then I look at some like tech companies or like biotech stuff, and I cannot comprehend like what is going on. Like it's and I'm not talking about the business itself. Like often I understand business wise what they're doing, but I like look at their annual statements and they just like
yeah,
it's just completely nonsensical. Like it's and yeah, anyway, so that's kind of why I was asking, partially because I think it's a pretty interesting time. Like I'm not I remain convinced that our, or maybe like my generation has a very tricky time. Like there's this kind of like overall thing where like people who are now starting to have worked long enough where they have some money to put to use, um, are faced with like the highest real estate prices, in history comparatively, and like potentially an asset bubble across everything. And so like, what do you do at the same time? You got inflation, and
Yeah.
it's tricky. Um, anyway, so that was your. I was going to say bi-weekly, but it's not bi-weekly. It's your randomly scheduled
Yes.
allocation of relatively inaccurate information.
Welcome to the Surprise Random Factor podcast.
Yeah, if
We
you
really
learn
should have called it
something,
the Random Factor podcast, man. That's great. The Random Encounter podcast. That one's growing on me. But anyway,
yeah, if you've learned something, you're doing it wrong. You should revisit your strategy for podcast listening.
I disagree. You really should take heed of the warning about AI tokens.
That's
Be
true.
very weary of any AI investment you get to make at the recent level, at the retail level right now. It is just look at things really closely.
Yeah. Yeah. If you invest in AI tokens, you should invest in them with the same strategy you invest in Dogecoin or Shiba.
I actually, I think that Dogecoin and Shiba are less disingenuous despite Musk's pump and dump involvement. I find those more honest. There's a level of purity to them that there isn't to someone calling themselves the artificial general super intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. That's true. I think that's also indicative of our indoctrination is, when we start being like, bonk is actually not that bad.
It, the problem with crypto is that it keeps moving your fucking parameters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, look at
You're
it.
not a
Bonk is a meme
degen
coin.
now.
No, look, Bonk is a meme coin, but it's just a meme coin. It's not a. Anyway, let's not rehash that thing.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you everyone. And we'll see you next time.
We're
Whenever
sure to
that is.
rant against something new, like Deepin or something.
All right. Thank you.